Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. I used to go hiking a lot. I must be more cautious in the future, more respectful towards the woods and the creatures living in there. It was a nice day. The sun was shining and birds were singing. I called my friend, Edward, to see if he would go camping with me. He said yes, and we both agreed to go camping that night. I packed my bags and started my car. I picked up my friend, and we listened to music and had an amazing conversation. Edward was funny, and we had many things in common, but he was rich. I don't mean that it's bad to be rich, but for him it was. It made him act like a piece of shit sometimes, like he was entitled to everything and everyone must like him. That was one part where we differed. I tried to be as respectful towards everyone and anyone I'd meet. Edward was still a good friend of mine. Edward talked to me about this folklore he had been interested in. It was about some creature called Pukwudgie. He told me that they're small creatures who try to lure people to their deaths. He also said that they look like trolls but have these spines in their back. Apparently, they also used to be friendly towards humans. It was an interesting conversation as I love folklore. It's fun, mysterious, and you can imagine it being real. Time flew by as we talked about different urban legends and folklore. It was fun, and it made the camping feel really mysterious, like anything we talked about could show up. We reached our destination. It was a national park, and it was huge. We had been there before, but we decided to go set up our tent and camping area in a different place than before. We wanted to see something mysterious. The first night we spent there went well. We sat by the campfire, talked about different things, and had a really great time. It was like every other camping experience I've had with Edward. We decided to go to sleep and wake up early the next morning to go fish. That night, I woke up to noises coming around the camp. I heard this sniffing sound, like someone was smelling our stuff. I also heard this weird noise that I can't explain. It sounded like they were talking to each other, but it was not English or any human language. There must have been like 3 different sounds. I thought that some coyotes came looking for food as we cooked, and they could smell the food. I went back to sleep. I was woken up a while later by something scratching our tent. The next morning, I woke up and got out of the tent. There were these tiny footprints all around the campsite, and my cookies were eaten by something. That's when I remembered the noises I heard. Did you hear anything last night? I say to Edward. I heard something scratching our tent, but I figured it was just a lizard or something. Edward answered me. He didn't hear the sounds before the scratching. We didn't think of what happened anymore and decided to go fishing like we had planned. We hiked to the lake near us, and we fished for a couple of hours. Edward catched a couple of trout that we kept. I swear that at one point I could hear the same talking type of noise I had heard the night before. I looked around, but didn't see anything. Our fishing came to an end, and we hiked back to our campsite. On the way there, I saw these small burrows beside the path. I saw movement in those burrows, and it looked like a porcupine was sleeping in there. It had these spines on its back. The next second, I looked, it was gone. On the way back, Edward slipped into one of these burrows, and he got a cut to his ankle. We got back to our campsite and cooked the fish we caught. Edward patched that cut up, and then we ate. The fish was delicious. The rest of that day went by. We just sat at our campsite and enjoyed nature. We talked about that same folklore, and Edward said that Pukwudgies talk to each other, and also that they can disappear or appear at will. That raised my curiosity towards them. That night, I heard the same noises, but this time they were louder and sounded a bit angry. They scratched our tent more, and it was bizarre. I opened the tent's curtains and looked outside. There were these small creatures exploring our campsite. It was dark, but the campfire was still barely burning, so it gave a little bit of light. I could see their silhouettes and some other features, like they had small hands that had sharp claws. They looked like little trolls, but had human-like faces. They also had glowing eyes that I could see. I saw so many pairs of eyes that I lost count. I got spooked and closed the curtains. And I tried to get more sleep. Our campsite is trashed. Someone has been here. Edward shouted. I opened the tent's curtains and tried to see what's going on. I was not fully awake at that point, so I couldn't remember anything. I also got a little bit annoyed by Edward shouting. So what if it is trashed? We can clean it up. I thought. He acted like there was some type of crime committed against us. I stepped outside and looked around. Everything was trashed. The campfire was stomped on, and the wood pieces that hadn't fully burned yet were thrown around the campsite. Our backpacks were all over the place. It looked like they were looking for something. We had a little bit of the fish left, so we ate that and then decided to go fishing again. "I gotta take a leak," I said to Edward. I looked around for a good place and decided to go behind this big tree. There are these same burrows around that place. I saw movement in the corner of my eye, but as I turned my head, there was nothing. Then I heard a big splash sound. I finished peeing and went back to fish. Edward was all wet when I got back. "You decided to cool off a little, huh?" I asked him while smirking. "No, something pushed me in the water," Edward said, and he sounded really confused. We decided that it was going to be our last night there. We had to stay one more night, as the hike back was about 3 hours, and if we would have left at that point, it would be dark halfway through the hike. I caught a couple of fish we could eat. They were pretty small, but enough for the two of us. We got back to our campsite and lit the campfire. We waited for it to be perfect for cooking and then cooked our fish. As we were cooking the fish, I started hearing the same noises. They were coming closer. "Can you hear that?" I asked Edward. "Yes, what is that?" He answered me. I told him I've been hearing this noise every night and also told him the other stuff. "This must be connected to some kind of animal," Edward said while being calm. Edward's calmness calmed me down as I almost started running around the place. I was terrified of those things. Then we heard footsteps approaching. They sounded small but fast. I look around, and all of a sudden we were surrounded by these small troll-looking creatures. They had spines in their backs, and they had small hands with sharp claws. "These look like the trolls I told you about," Edward whispered to me. I nodded. "They came to sit around us. They tried to steal the fish, but we didn't let them. We acted like they weren't there and just ate the fish. I gave them a couple of small bites to see if they would eat it. They did eat it, and I was amazed. How was it possible that people didn't know about this, or they did, but no one believed the folklore? As we were eating, we hear footsteps again. This time, they sounded like the creature was much bigger. Then we see a bigger pukwudgie approach. He came to sit with us and said disturb would. "Go away." It sounded really weird and not human at all. I figured he must have learned that while listening to people. The creature seemed highly intelligent. "Sorry to bother you," I said. "We didn't know this was your home," Edward added. The big pukwudgie then said destroy home. "You must pay." I started to wonder how we could destroy their home. We just camped there and picked up every piece of garbage that we saw. Then it came to my mind. Edward slipped to the burrow. Those burrows must have been their homes. "I'm sorry. We will do whatever is right to fix this," I told him. Edward looked annoyed, like he believed we could beat them up or somehow just leave. That pissed me off. Then the leader of pukwudgies spoke again, "Do nothing. Give food," and pointed at me. "Must pay," he said and pointed at Edward. "I'm not going to pay you anything," Edward shouted. He was a little bit spoiled. His parents bought him anything he wanted, and he could get off the hook every time, no matter what he had done. "Edward, you must do something. They will kill us otherwise," I told him with a shaky voice. He started rambling about why should he pay for anything. The pukwudgies started to make some noise, and it sounded really angry. Then they just disappeared. After a while, we heard footsteps and bushes rambling, but it sounded human. "Hello there." Some random dude yelled at us. I got scared and almost hit him. It was just another hiker coming to camp there. We talked to him for a bit and warned him to look out for the burrows and to respect the woods. Then we packed as quickly as we could and left that place. We were supposed to wait until morning, but Edward demanded that we leave as soon as possible. He was scared to death, as was I. We hiked through the woods and did not see anything unusual. We were 20 minutes away from the parking lot when we heard the pukwudgie speaking again. It was louder than previously and angrier too. They were coming for us, or at least for Edward. Then we saw them appear right in front of us. They didn't speak to us anymore, just stood there while angrily looking at us. We started running, and I got through them, but they stopped Edward. Edward was screaming very loud, so I stopped and looked back. They were carrying Edward back to the woods. I saw their spines pierce Edward's arms and legs. I watched them carry Edward to a burrow. Then they just disappeared. The big pukwudgie appeared to me and waved at me. I was too scared to go help Edward. I didn't want to go with them. I wanted to live. I got back to my car and drove off. I felt horrible for leaving Edward there and not helping, but how could I even help at that point? A few weeks went by, and I saw a news article about people disappearing in that national park. There was a photo of the guy we saw just before we left. He disappeared too. I still think about why I didn't help Edward, but what is done, and life goes on. Also, what really happened to Edward? Did he die? My last words are, always respect nature and every creature living in it. I know I have to respect nature even more if I ever want to go there again. Story 2. My wife Anna passed close to my son's 7-carat TH birthday. She was off visiting her family in Mexico and suddenly fell ill. About 72 hours from her showing the initial symptoms, we were told she'd passed away. I can't properly describe how devastating it was. I'm not going to go into that. Not here. I've lived in Guatemala my whole life. While I've been both north and south of the border a couple of times, there'd always been something pulling me back to my home country. Anna and I had lived in Antigua ever since Gasper was born, but we'd always talked about moving to the East Coast. She was born there, and it always seemed like a nice place to raise kids. Now, we only had time to have one child, but I was going to give him the best life I could afford. I mean, it's not like we didn't try to have more. Things just didn't work out that way. I could still see her whenever I saw my boy. He had her eyes and her brown hair. I couldn't look at him without remembering the promises we'd made. So a couple of months after Anna passed, I packed our things and moved. No more waiting. If you continue northeast past Puerto Barrios, there's a small coastal town. You know you're getting there when the roads turn to dirt and the jacaranda trees grow taller. It's like nature knows people got to stay longer in the sun, so the branches reach a little further and the shade grows a little thicker. I'd grown up working with boats, so it was easy enough to get a job. A couple of folks knew Anna's family, so I had a foot in the door before they even met me. I got a cheap house made of beautiful, smooth white stone, and one wall which was just raw exposed brick. It really reflected the town, stunningly beautiful from the right angle. We moved in on short notice. The house had been empty since the previous owner passed, and the surviving family decided to sell off. It was nice enough, but you could tell there was more history to it than you might be comfortable with. Little notches on the floor, subtle stains on the walls, a kitchen where the smell of fried fish wouldn't go away. It wasn't unpleasant, just different. Anna's death had been hard on everyone. I had to keep up appearances and focus on Gasper, but now that I was settling into a new routine, things were changing fast. Gasper was starting school and getting to meet all new friends. I guess in a way I was supposed to do that too. It's silly worrying about whether your work colleagues are going to like you or not, but it can make or break your social life. And at my age, what little social life you have is precious. As I got used to the new town, I spent a lot of time by the sea. Boats would come and go at all hours of the day. There was this one station by the pier open 24 hours a day where everyone was registered, meaning there was always some disinterested teenager sitting in the booth, waiting to sign a sheet of paper. I think the smell was the hardest to get used to. Salt and fish and foam. Sick, sweet, and salt. All hitting you at different angles like the southpaw of a skillful boxer. On my first day of work, I was early. Early enough to watch the first fisherman pull into the pier. A tired man in his early 50s pulled a cart with 4 coolers, waving at the tired kid in the booth. He sat down on the bench next to me. Maybe he was overworked or a little drunk, but I could tell he wasn't all right. He looked over at me with deep bags under his eyes. "You're new," he stated matter-of-factly. "I am," I said. "I fix boats." "Good," he nodded. "Only reason mine floats is because it's too shit for the ocean to eat." "She's not a picky eater," I smiled. "What?" I said, "She's not a picky eater," I repeated. "You know the ocean." "Don't talk like you know her, Quat," he said, giving me a cold look. "You don't know her like I do. Don't pretend you do. I'm just making conversation. And I'm here to make a good one," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Don't think you can figure this place out in a couple days. There's history in this land. There's bones in that sea. You understand?" "I get you," I said. "I respect that." The man got up and dragged his cart along, smacking the side of the wall of a nearby house. Someone was already up to meet him, but they didn't seem too happy about it. I watched 2 young women help carry the coolers inside, talking to him with tired smiles, and he just waved them off. "Don't mind Simone," someone said. "He's crazy." I turned around and recognized my employer, Lino. He'd stood there for a while just to see what I was up to. I got up in a flash, reaching out to shake his hand. He accepted it with a smile. He's 30 years older than he looks, Lino continued. Been a grumpy old man since he was a kid, they say. I don't mind grumpy, I smiled. That's what towns are made of, right? Yeah, Lino grinned. So let's hope we get to be grumpy old men, too. Lino's workshop felt like someone's living room. Pictures on the walls, music playing on the speakers, equal smells of motor oil and Ronzacapa. Lino was an absolute treasure of a person. If "Don't Worry, Be Happy" had a face, it'd be him. He had a green shirt that was older than my kid, and this sort of ill-kept handlebar mustache that he kept stroking when he tried to keep a serious face. I couldn't help but think he looked like a tanner Freddie Mercury, minus the teeth. We worked on the engine of a private boat that day. Leisure-type stuff, not anything big and functional. Someone came in saying the engine kept stalling. Lino figured they'd been getting too close to shore and kept getting trash stuck in the propeller, but I convinced him to do a thorough check. We found some engine tearing that might lead to a complete breakdown in a couple more runs, so we fixed it. It was quick and cheap, and Lino charged next to nothing for it despite it costing us half a day to work through. You make people who can afford a boat like this happy. They won't ever go to someone else, he said. It's not just making friends. It's good business. By the end of our first day, we stopped outside the workshop to have a smoke. I hadn't smoked since I met Anna, but I didn't see the point to stick to that anymore. One puff and I got the coughs. Lino picked up on it, but decided not to ask. Instead, he pointed at a shed just off the pier. You see that, he said. Take a look. Tell me what you see. A shed, I said. Cheap roofing. No, see what's on the roof? I looked a little closer. 2 seagulls. That's right, Lino said. 2 seagulls. Now, have you noticed something strange about them? Other than not shitting on me, no. Yeah, but that's just the thing. There are gulls everywhere. Listen, I took another puff of smoke, letting it coat my lungs and simmer into my nerves. I turned my head up and closed my eyes. All I could hear was the pulse of the ocean and the clatter of everyday life coming from the buildings around us. I couldn't hear the gulls. They're silent around here, Lino said. You won't hear them screaming or attacking. They don't do that. Bullshit. No, I'm serious, he smiled. They say so many people died at sea that even the gulls stopped laughing about it. They say that, huh? Well, Simone does, Lino nodded. But he loves those things, so he should know. You can see him feeding them before he goes out every night. I didn't even question it. Grumpy people tend to prefer the company of animals. There was a place right next door to the workshop where I could get some cheap tapadoo, so I bought some for me and Gasper. I took the long road back home, getting acquainted with the streets and those who live there. A couple of folks gave me crooked looks and folded arms, but others waved and cheered as I passed. It would take some time, but I could see them warming up to me. By the time I got to my street, I noticed something. There were seagulls all over the roof, looking down on me. About 30 of them, all in all. It was true what Lino said. They'd been unusually quiet. I'd never seen a seagull that hadn't screeched and hooped. But these were different, somehow. As I approached, I could see them gathering at the edge of the roof, looking down on me. Gasper was already home, waiting by the door. Before I got a chance to greet him, one of the gulls opened its mouth and screamed. One by one, they joined in. It wasn't the usual cackling of seagulls. It was more of a laugh. A stunted, stuttered laugh. Gasper and I had dinner in the living room, watching cartoons on the TV. I asked him about school, but he was too shy to talk about it. He wasn't really a fan of the soup I'd bought, but I promised he'd get used to it. There were so many other things to try too. If we asked nicely, I bet we could go out on a boat, I said. I think you'd like it. It's nice out there. I don't like the ocean, he said. It's too big. Scary. That's what makes it great. You can swim for hours, and there's always something new to see. I prefer YouTube. Smart ass. He finished up and hunkered down in his room. I sat down in the kitchen, popped open a gallo, and took the load off my feet. But even then, I noticed a gull on the fence outside, staring right into my kitchen window, and the moment our eyes met it laughed. And not in a way that gulls usually do. The following morning, after I sent Gasper to school, I met Simone by the pier again. He had 5 coolers that morning, a successful trip, it seemed. He sat down on the same bench side and gave me a tired side eye. He didn't have much to say, so I decided to take the lead on this one. They say you know the goals, I said. Is that true? You better believe it, he nodded. They're my children. So what does it mean when they laugh at you? He turned to me, his expression growing concerned. They laugh at you? Yeah, a bunch of them did yesterday. Means you got misery coming, Quat. They got you with the Reese's Delmar. They sensed something. The laugh of the sea. Simone even had a name for it. They sensed that darkness in you, Quat. You can hide it from the rest, but you're not fooling my goals. They're gonna laugh at you. Why'd they do that? Maybe they want you to chin up. Maybe you're bringing my goals down. Maybe they don't think you belong. Could be a lot of things. He got up with a grunt and grabbed his card. Without looking back, he ended the conversation. You think you belong here? He chuckled. You think this is meant for you? I had no answer. And in the distance, a gull laughed. I spent a couple of days working with Lino to get into the rhythm of things. Just like he'd said, the rich client came back with another boat. This one was more of a touch-up job rather than a pure fix. We just looked it over, cleaned it a bit, and called it a day. Took us just a couple of hours and paid more than the last job 2 times over. We took some time working with the local fishermen. Quick fixes mostly. Lino introduced me to half the town. I got told more names than I could count. One guy, son of another guy, cousin to third guy. There was the dumb guy with the hot sister. The even dumber guy who married her. This was a town of stories and lives, and I was jumping straight into it with both feet at once. I stepped out of that workshop feeling lighter than I'd been in weeks. There was that glimpse of something new that maybe if I worked hard, I could make a life for myself. Then I peer up at the rooftops, and there the gulls sat, laughing. I felt my smile fade. They could see past it all. They could see and laugh at my pain. It was there, hidden under a vain attempt at fitting in. Don't let them get to you. Compa, Lino said. It's just birds. But wasn't that easy? I'd hear them every morning as I went to work. I'd see them on the rooftops, looking down on me. They never laughed at anyone else. Not Simone, not Lino, not the dumb guy with the hot sister. No one, just me. The Reese's Delmar, the laugh of the sea. Maybe misery didn't love company. Maybe she just lives by the coast. Sometimes the gulls would get louder. Whenever I stubbed a toe or stalled an engine, they'd laugh even harder. I would be so prepared to hear them that I'd get distracted, which would just cause more misfortune. I once tried bribing them, putting out a bowl of cooked, unsalted rice. They wouldn't touch it. They just circled it, picked at it, and laughed. I'd never seen a bird reject a free meal. One night, as I went to bed, I thought about the people that used to live in that house. They'd slept in that room too, coloring it with their little dreams and hopes. I could almost see myself in 30 years, just like they did, laying in that same room, dreaming the same dreams. But in those moments, the space next to me felt colder than ever. I missed Anna with every breath of every day, but in those cold hours of the night, it hurt just a little more. And in those moments of weakness, where a tear might chase its way into my eyes, I'd hear the gulls outside, laughing. Please stop. I'd whisper into my pillow. Please stop laughing. That just made them laugh harder. Louder. I've done you nothing. Please. But they didn't stop. They'd laugh all night, hoping to wound me for just a little longer. Lino had a slightly different view of things. He and the other locals stuck to this one saying that would slip out every now and then. El que mucho se ausenta pronto deja de hacer falta. Or he who is often absent stops being missed. You have to put yourself out there if you want to be part of things. So instead of wallowing in self-pity, I was going to have to put myself on the line. Now, Lino never once asked me about Anna and our lives together. He'd heard a little about it, and he knew better than to ask. So instead, he just did his best to bring me along. Fishing trips with some of his cousins. Late nights at the bar watching sports and drinking rum. Gasper would stay at a friend's house. He was quicker to pick up friends than me, I figured. Lino would introduce me to single women my age, but back off when he realized I wasn't ready. But with every step forward, there'd be that long walk home at night. And every single time, there'd be a gull, laughing its heart out, reminding me that at the end of it all, that room would be as dark as ever, as cold as ever, dead. There was one morning when I hadn't slept that well. As I ran into Simone, the gulls were at full force, circling me, laughing from up high. I snapped at Simone as he came by, pulling his cart. Just 3 coolers that morning. What do I gotta do? I asked. How long are they gonna laugh at me? You getting mad at the birds, Quat? Simone had the same laugh as the gulls. Maybe they got it from him. I'm serious, I said. This is ridiculous. You blame the mirror for making you ugly, too? Shut up. He stopped for a moment and looked at me, shaking his head. You know the last one the gulls laughed at? He asked. Same woman that lived in that house of yours. Not long before she died. You trying to scare me? Ask anyone, he continued. Right before she died, they were all over her. And her husband? Who knows? He never left the house. You'd forget he even lived there. So what are you trying to say? That I'm about to die? Simone rolled his eyes and grabbed his cart. I'm telling you to stop being weak, he snapped back. Have a drink. Cut your hair. Kiss a woman. He flicked a couple of coins at me as he wandered off, still laughing. Just like the gulls. That day turned out awful. Just awful. I broke an expensive spare part and cut my palm on a sharp knife. When Lino came over to help, I turned him away. I didn't even think about it. Even though my ears couldn't hear them, my heart echoed with the shrieking laughter of the gulls. De risas del mar. When I sat down to clear my head, Lino joined me, giving me some time to calm down. You know the people who live in that house before me? I asked. Lady de Leon? He asked. Yeah, I remember her. Simone says the gulls laughed at her before she died. Yeah, I remember, he said. Can't say it was a big surprise. She was ancient, but we miss her. What about her husband? Lino raised an eyebrow at that. Then he nodded, as if a light had come on in the back of his mind. Right, he said. I forget about him sometimes. He never left the house, but you could see his stupid red hat in the windows. Did he die too? I suppose he did, Lino nodded. I can't remember. Coming home that evening, I anticipated the gulls sitting in a row along the roof, laughing at me. They knew I'd had a bad day, and they weren't about to let me forget it. But they weren't there. The house was empty. Not a single gull, not a hint of a laugh. It was nice in a way. It showed me a home the way it was meant to be seen. I wouldn't dread going to sleep that night, but I still felt like something was off. For all the unease those birds brought me, there was something stranger about them suddenly going away. Had I done something wrong? Gasper, I called out. I'm making shrimp. You want coconut rice or the usual? There was no response. I walked out into the hallway, looking around. He wasn't in the living room. Not in the backyard either. By the time I dug through his room, I could feel my pulse rising. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't coming out. I called out, and there was no response. Gasper, I kept calling, but he wasn't out back or out front. He wasn't coming down the road. I expected his voice, but got only echoes of mine. He should have been home by now, and the seagulls were gone. I called his school, but he wasn't there. I asked for the name of his friend, so I could see if he stayed with them for dinner. But I got an unusual response. What friend? Turns out, Gasper had been having trouble in school. He had trouble relating to the other kids, and they had trouble fitting him into groups. He wouldn't get into fights, but he would blend into the background. They'd forget he was even there. I called every kid in his class, asking if they'd seen my boy. Most of them didn't know his name. No one had seen anything. He just put on his backpack and wandered off, like every other day. Or so they thought. They couldn't remember for sure. Finally, I turned to Lino. I asked him to reach out to everyone he knew. My boy is missing. I stuttered. You must help me. I must find him. You have a kid? He asked. Of course. He's Gasper. My boy. You never talk about him, Lino said. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I have. A son. I emphasized. I'll make some calls. What does he look like? I looked at one of the pictures on the wall. Gasper, Anna, and me. It was blurry. Sun-bleached. Brown hair, I said. He has brown hair. What else? I didn't have an answer. For some reason, I couldn't think of anything. Not his eyes. Not his smile. I could barely even imagine his voice. I hung up on Lino and looked out the window. A single gull sat on the fence outside, its head cocked to the side. They weren't laughing anymore. If anything, it seemed concerned. I drove around town asking anyone and everyone if they'd seen him. A boy walking around with a backpack, looking lost or scared. No one had seen him. Heard him. Nothing. Finally, I drove by this rundown little one-story house, its walls patched with driftwood planks and sheet metal. It was impossible not to recognize the man swaying back and forth in a hammock on the porch. Simone, listening to his radio. I stopped. I wanted to ask him if he'd seen my boy, but I knew the answer already. Instead, I got out of my car and called out to him. "Did you ask them to do this?" I yelled. "Is this you?" "Is this what?" He yelled back. "What do you want? You don't like me, so now the goals don't like me. And now my boy is gone." Simone rolled out of his hammock and turned off the radio. He gave me a curious look, not angry, concerned like the goals. "He didn't come home. I can't find him," I continued. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, Simone." "They laugh at pain, Quat," he said. "Pain is for those who are still here. Those who are gone don't suffer anymore. Stop it with the fucking riddles." I snapped. "I'll make you swallow your teeth. Just tell me what they did to my boy." Simone picked something up from the side of his hammock and walked over to me. Still not angry. He looked up at the sky. "I don't think they were laughing, Quat," he said. "I think they were trying to warn you." "That's not what you said. You said they laugh at my pain. Two things could be true, you know. They're birds. They're not complicated. But you know what I think?" He took a swig from a bottle and pointed eastward. A long line of gulls could be seen in the distance, circling something. "Maybe they're still warning you," he said. "Pay attention. Listen." I got back in my car, trying to see the gulls. It was a weird angle, but I could hang my head out the window if necessary. Simone knocked on my window. "No," he said. "They're going out to sea." He opened the car door and held out a hand. "We'll take my boat." Simone's boat was in desperate need of a touch-up. He'd been stubborn about getting it fixed, but I could hear the engine struggling the moment it puttered away from the pier. We were heading east, where the gulls still circled. I had a moment of doubt. I'd been projecting my insecurities on these birds for weeks at that point. What if I was still doing it? But no, that wasn't it. Despite it all, I could tell Simone had his heart in the right place. When shit hits the fan, you don't want the person who tells you everything is going to be okay. You want the one who spits on the problem and say, "Let's get this done." The sun was setting, slowly but surely. A stiff breeze rattled the buttons on my pale, orange shirt. I couldn't smell the ocean anymore. I'd gotten used to it. Something hit the boat. Maybe a rock, or a sudden push from a wave. Simone tried to keep us straight, but it was too late. I fell overboard, plunging into the dark. For those who haven't swum in the open sea, there's nothing quite like it. An eternal mix of emerald blue in every direction, turning into a shimmering orange as the sun sets. In the distance, you might see a few spots swimming about, only to realize they're fish the size of your hand. But down there, it all looks small, even you. And don't look down. At the best of times, you see immense darkness sucking you down. And in the worst of cases, you see something coming up. I forced my head above the surface. The sun had already set. A mild fog was settling over the ocean surface. I couldn't see anything. Left, right, it was all just water. Waves pushing me in every direction, grabbing a hold of me. I could feel a chill reaching up to spill the warmth in my chest. My toes were already tingling. As I kicked, one of my shoes came off, tumbling downward like a slow leaf in the wind, rocked by invisible currents. I called out to Simone, but I could barely hear my voice over the waves. There was no way he'd hear me over the engine. Then again, I couldn't even hear him anymore. He must have kept going or sunk, but I could hear something else. Seagulls. I listened and swam until my arms ached. My eyes burned from the salt. I could feel my legs taking longer and longer to kick as my head dipped further under the surface. I had trouble getting my mouth up. I swallowed a mouthful of salt water as my rhythm broke, and in another 2 kicks, I was submerged. I counted to 30, kicking as hard as I could. Then, out of nowhere, my toes touched sand. I pulled my way onto a long, deserted beach. Not a bird among the trees. No insects in the bushes. A steady wind pulled on the leaves of the blue sunflowers resting under the sweet gum trees, making them rattle like a dry applause. Then I saw people, just a couple of them, standing further in by the tree-line. Dark, tired eyes, lips so chapped they looked like leather. A man with a broken shirt hanging off his left shoulder. A middle-aged woman in a folk dress. As I approached, they stepped back. "I need help," I wheezed. "I need to find my boy." They didn't say a word. I took a couple steps forward, and they faded into the dark, disappearing into the shade of the trees. They left no footsteps in the sand. There were so many more. The further I went, and the closer I looked, I saw them. Quiet people looking on from afar. If I got too close, they'd step away. If I stopped to look, they did the same. Dark, tired eyes, asking me silent questions. Some of them looked old, not in age, but in clothes. 100 years, 200 years, maybe 1,000. One of them was an old man with an unusual red bucket hat. I looked a little closer, but couldn't figure out what he reminded me of. Perhaps I forgot. I'd been so preoccupied with my own troubles and woes that I hadn't considered Gasper. I hadn't stopped to make sure he was okay. Much like the rest of town, and even his school, I'd forgotten about him. Maybe that's what the gulls were laughing at. Not me messing up another social faux pas with Lino and the boys, but me forgetting to check in on my boy. "I'm sorry, Anna," I muttered as I dragged my feet through the cooling sand, one shoe missing. I was just looking at me. It was just about me. I forgot. There was a fire up ahead. A campfire on the beach. Stepping closer, I could see two people sitting on a log, staring into the flames. A tall man and a boy. I recognized neither. I was having trouble focusing on the man. One moment, he was tall and slim. The other, he was short and fat. He was young. He was old. He was handsome. He was ugly. He would shift and turn, as if to change whenever I thought I had an idea of what he looked like. Like he refused to be what I expected. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The words didn't come from him. Instead, they came from the tree-line. A dozen dialects all at once. A single chorus of voices. "I cannot care for you," they said. "I'm looking for someone," I said. "I don't need you to care." Asterisk. Who are you looking for? Asterisk, a cacophony. Struggling voices, having been dormant for years. I'd hear them fight to remember the words and to roll their stiff tongues. "My boy," I said. "I'm looking for my boy." Asterisk, is this him? Asterisk, they asked. I looked at the boy by the fire. I couldn't say. I couldn't place him in my mind. I could only remember what I'd said about him, or what others had said. I could remember Anna telling me how she loved his curly brown hair, but I couldn't picture it. "I care for him," they said. Asterisk, I do not forget. Asterisk, their voices crackled, breaking into monotones. "They left me in the woods," a man said. "I slept in the mountains. No one came to find me," said another. "I fell over." They kept going. There were hammerheads in the water. They never asked me my name. People abandoned, forgotten, sacrificed, left to die by the side of the road, or stuck in a mountain crevice. "If he is here, you must find him," the choir said. Asterisk, will you look? Asterisk, I will look, I agreed. I'll look anywhere. You may have to stay for long, they said. Asterisk, until perhaps you are forgotten too. Asterisk, I don't care. Asterisk, good. Asterisk, in the blink of an eye, I was along a country road. My leg was broken. I was screaming for help, but no one came. The flies wouldn't stop gathering on my face, picking at dry blood. Pain, desperation. They should have been there hours ago, but they forgot. Bleeding through the night, passing from warmth to warmth again, serenaded to the other side by whispering insects. Then, watching a boat disappear on the horizon. My legs growing weak, the waves growing higher. They must have noticed I was gone. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't care. Movement in the dark, creeping closer. Something brushing up against my leg. Something with rough skin. A single eye reflecting the moonlight as a hammerhead shark waits for me to die. Life after life after life. All forgotten. And at the end of every final breath, the gulls laughed in the distance, trying to make the others see, to listen, to remember. It was ceaseless, relentless. In one moment, I'm drinking myself to death, hoping someone would find me in a bathtub. In the next, I'm outside a bar with a knife in my gut. I'm in the corner of a burning building, but the firemen forgot to look for me. Death after death after death. But I have to keep going. Then a boy. He didn't want his dad to worry, so he said he would stay with a friend. Instead, he hid in his room, looking at pictures of his mother. He made his own bed, cooked his own dinner. It would be okay. He rarely left the house. He skipped school most days. There was no point for him to learn, since he couldn't picture a future anyway. He'd get by somehow. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe it didn't matter. Another voice joining the choir of things that didn't need to be. It was a cruel twist of fate. I couldn't remember him, no matter how hard I tried. And even if I knew in my heart of hearts he was among them, I couldn't picture him. But I could remember Anna. And thinking of her eyes and her hair, I could remember him too. I remembered her words, whispering his name as she cradled him. And with those sprinkles of thought, a picture started to form. A name, a shape, a voice. He's afraid of the sea, I said. He'd rather watch YouTube. Is that okay? Asked the boy by the fire. Yeah, I sobbed. That's okay. We can watch together. I took him by the hand. The people in the dark stepped aside. The man by the fire remained silent, watching as we went. And in the distance, the gulls laughed. Not out of menace or spite, but out of relief. It hasn't been an easy life since then. Both Gasper and I had healing to do. We had to start talking openly about Anna and the life we could expect without her. It was painful, but necessary. We talked about where we'd celebrate the holidays, where we'd go on holiday. And instead of presuming or hoping, we talked about it, and we made plans. Maybe he'd have a new mother someday. Maybe he'd even have a little brother or sister play with. He said he'd like that. Whenever I was ready to try, I would have his blessing. I took him out with Simone's boat once. I helped fix it up a bit first. The man is salter than the sea, but he's honest. I'm surprised how much Gasper likes him. I think Simone had a soft spot for Gasper, too. Maybe kids are like gulls in a way. Simple. The gulls don't laugh no more. Not for me. Not for anyone. Now, when Simone goes to feed them, I sit next to him. Gasper does too, and they humbly accept whatever we offer. Story 3. There was little I wouldn't do for money, although I'd recently drawn the line at drug testing. Call me lazy, but I just despise the idea of working a 9 to 5 and have done since I was old enough to skip school. Still, I live what I would regard as comfortably with what work I do get and a little extra on the side from dodgy online gambling sites. Today, I had signed up to be part of some corporate focus group thing. Joining over email, I'd been given directions to their nearest site, which was surprisingly and conveniently quite near my apartment. On the outside, it looked like just another one of the drab, gray, inner-city buildings that came with urban decay. Past the front doors, however, was a lavish, almost Regent-era waiting room. Ornately carved, dark mahogany walls ended in a row of finely upholstered red leather seats. As had been instructed in the email, I sat down and waited for someone to come through the double doors on the far side of the room. After 20 minutes of chewing through a pack of apple-flavored gum and aimlessly scrolling short-form media on my phone, someone did. She was a tall woman in a slender red dress. She wore a noose of pearls, and her tar-black hair was pulled uncomfortably tight along her scalp, ending in a fist-sized bun. "I'm Lilith," she said as she walked towards me, her stilettos clacking loudly. "You must be a volunteer for the sample testing." I stood, smiled, and shook her hand. "That's right," I replied, and then parroted her name back to her. "Lilith, like the psychologist from that show." She smiled with scant amusement. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar," she said. For some reason, I felt a tinge of embarrassment. She was a beautiful woman, after all, and seeing as she had no wedding ring, I reckoned I could have her number before the end of the session. I said, "Follow me," Lilith repeated. I didn't hear her first command, but apologized still and followed her through the double doors. Behind them was a long, equally Gothic corridor that ended in a much more industrial-looking door. She opened it, and we entered a small, sterile room. The white walls looked like the enamel shell of a bathroom sink, and I was attacked by the overwhelming smell of cleaning products. "Take a seat," said Lilith as she gestured to the sturdy, iron chair that lay in the center of the room. It was the one piece of furniture, or really anything other than white tiling, that I could make out. As she had asked, I sat. The seat was uncomfortable, but I didn't think I'd be here long. As such, I didn't make a fuss. I looked up at Lilith, who produced a clipboard from nowhere in particular. She held it out, and I took it from her hands. "Please fill in all fields," she ordered and turned away. "I will be back in 15 minutes. I smiled at her and watched her hips sway gently as she closed the door behind her, leaving me on my own. I leaned back, trying to make out a comfortable position in the rigid, cubist chair. I failed, and unclipped the pen from the side of the clipboard. I flipped back to the front page and quietly read the first part of the survey to myself. "Please answer all questions thoroughly and honestly. Not doing so will result in payment nullification." I chuckled at the stock warning that came with all of these corporate surveys. I've bent the truth plenty of times on these sorts of things, and they've never caught me out. My eyes fell on the first question. The simplest one, of course. Name. I scribbled it down along the dotted line next to the lone word and moved on to the next question. Occupation. I was functionally unemployed, but decided to use my usual answer, a poet. It was practically the truth anyway, as I did fancy myself as something of a poet. After a few more personal questions on the first page, I flipped over to the second and was greeted with rows of multiple choice. How satisfied are you with your current position in life? I smirked. I still wasn't sure what the survey was about, or even what company I was doing it for. But from this question, I guessed it was something to do with selling a certain lifestyle. You saw things like this all the time. Advertising now seemed to leap on the idea for every single mundane product. I felt sick of hearing how an adult sippy cup was supposed to revolutionize my way of being. I scanned the possible answers to the questions, realizing I didn't relate to any of them. In the end, I thoughtlessly ticked the box that corresponded with moderately satisfied. The next question was even more open-ended. Do you enjoy life? Answering this one took less internal debate. I ticked yes, and moved on to the next one. Are there people in your life that you would regard as important to you? The possible answers descending beneath it range from none to countless. I sniffed stoically and marked in the first option. It wasn't exactly true. I had my mother, of course, but who cares with these surveys? I barely read the questions anyway. I skimmed over the next question, and I'm afraid I couldn't tell you what it was. Something to do with intangible concepts like happiness and fulfillment, no doubt. I turned the page and saw that the next segment was a series of yes or no questions. I unwisely chewed the top of the pen and read through them. Did you have a generally happy childhood? Yes. Do you still speak with one or both of your parents? Yes. Have you volunteered for community work in the past 18 months? No. Do you have a history of substance abuse? Yes. Do you have a close-knit group of friends? Yes, I lied. Are you generally regarded as trustworthy by those who know you? Yes. Do you believe in God? I was taken aback by the sudden religious curveball. I was resigned to just powering through the questions with little thought, but this one made me stop and think. I was born into a religious family, and my mother was still certainly devout. I attended church often in my youth, as I had been forced to, but now I rarely did. It had been years, in fact, since I had walked over hallowed ground. After much deliberation, I ticked the small square on the page next to the word no. Some more filler later, I turned on to what I then believed to be the last page of the survey. In front of me were 3 questions, each with suitable amounts of dotted lines below them that instructed me to answer freely. The first of them cemented my theory that this was all for some sort of socio-medical startup. I was sure of it now, but I'd still make a point of asking Lilith when she came back. I read and reread the first question on that page, until it unlocked something that had lain dormant in my Stillwater memory since childhood. What was the most physically painful personal experience of your life? For my 6th birthday, my parents bought me a bike. I've been pleading for one constantly, and since my family was one on the other side of the tracks, it was the only present they could afford to get me that year. I didn't much care, though. I cherished it. At least, I did for a week or two. There was a storm not too long after my birthday. No severe damage came from it, but a few loose tiles had been blown from the roof. On one particular dry and somewhat sunny day, I decided to take my bike out for a ride. I still use stabilizers and would for the foreseeable future. The reality of riding a bike ended up terrifying me, and I barely had enough confidence to cycle the small path that encircled my home. As I was saying, this one day I did. I took my bike from the shed and began to ride. My mother was outside. I vividly remember. I was riding, and she'd cheer me on from her garden chair, sipping a drink of sorts and reading a magazine. I was coming in hot around one corner of our home, maybe a little too fast. One unsecure bolt on my bike stabilizers gave way and flipped vertically, sending me flying. I had no real garden, only a scattering of gravel. A broken shard of slate, blown from the roof, lay at an angle pointing out from it was lodged in the gravel. When I fell, the sharpened fragment cut into the base of my shin. As I fell forward, my bicycle came down on top of me. The shard sliced upwards, degloving the surface layer of flesh from my shin bone. I can remember then my mother running to my side and helping me up, only for her footing to falter when she saw the red of the blood and the white of my bone. A strange numbness kept the pain at bay for some time, but not forever. By the time the ambulance took me away, I was screaming my throat raw. I recounted this experience in a small, scribbled-out summary and moved on to the next question. What happens after we die? I answered simply, nothing. The final question of the survey, or at least this part of it, was as follows. What is more painful than living an eternity away from the light of God? It was a clearly subjective, philosophical question. There was no right or wrong answer, so I was confident in writing down whatever came to mind. After some pen chewing, I decided to answer with my ill-advised attempt at humor. Spending an hour with my ex-wife. With that, the survey was done. I reset the page order on the clipboard and tried, once again, to find a comfortable position in the steel chair as I waited for Lilith to return. I failed, but it didn't matter as I quickly heard the rhythmic click of her stilettos just behind the door. I turned to it right as it opened, and my hostess walked in. "I take it you've finished," she said rather than asked. "I have," I replied, holding the survey out to her, "but I have a few questions before I go." She took the clipboard dutifully from me. I began to stand up from the chair, and she soured. "Please remain seated," barked Lilith. Confused by her sudden outburst, I sat back down and watched her fumble with the small handbag by her waist, the one she'd just slid the survey into. "I'm sorry. Is there another part to the survey? Should I began but faltered. Lilith took a polished, blue metal handgun from the bag. It was a small thing, but seemed weighty in her grasp. A low squeak was all that escaped my gaping mouth as she pressed the barrel against my forehead. My eyes widened in sudden realization and were kept open by inaction. Lilith pulled the trigger and sent a thumbnail-sized piece of lead alloy traveling at 300 meters per second into my brain. The first thing I felt was the heat. It reminded me of the flash of discomfort that came with putting your hand too close to a stovetop. Only it persisted and wrapped around my body like a chrysalis. The next thing to hit me was an overwhelming thirst and then a wave of fatigue as I stood up. After rubbing them vigorously with the palm of my hand, my eyes started to focus. I looked around me and whimpered. The landscape had the mind-breaking intensity of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. I realized that I was standing on a small hill that overlooked a thinning plateau and collapsed into a dark canyon not too far from my position. The black sand under me started to burn away at the soles of my shoes, and I moved a foot forward, then the other. Before I knew it, I begun to walk forward. I soon reached the edge of the canyon. My eyes watered as I saw the fetid stream that had carved the ravine through the landscape. Hundreds, thousands, countless human corpses moved fluidly down a snaking path. The stench that came from the river of bodies was unbearable. I staggered back, leaving the nightmarish view in my wake. As I ran, my mind slowly breaking, I registered a shrieking noise that came from all around me. My head shot up and I saw them. Things flew through the carmine sky that looked like a cross between a hawk and a pile of rusting cutlery. Some swooped every which way. Others circled ritualistically like vultures eyeing roadkill. I let out a scream of my own as one dove towards me. The thing's iron talon tore through my shoulder. I kicked and flailed as it picked me up from the ground. The amalgam flew with me, gored underneath it. I felt like my arm could tear from the socket at any moment. The pain was more than I thought I could bear. The thing started to fall from the sky, then lifted again. This repeated a few more times, getting lower to the ground with each. Thankfully, I was too heavy for it to carry. As soon as my feet touched the charred ground, I rolled forward, the claw popping from my wound. I scrambled under a rotting, wooden cart covered in a red ivy. I hid there and watched the thing fly away to join the rest of the metallic flock. They were now locked in battle with what looked like men, victims of tar and feathering, who now bore mangled swan wings and darted through the air. I curled up into a ball and cried. What was this? What had I done to deserve it? In the hours I spent sobbing under that cart, I heard things that made my ears bleed, things that tore my trust in humanity to ribbons, things that I will hear at the edge of sleep for an eternity. My mental anguish outweighed the physical pain that came with the burns that now cover my body. Touching the black dust that covered the ground was like walking over an open fire. Eventually, I physically couldn't cry anymore. I rolled around onto my side and whimpered. Gradually, while I lay on the upturned cart, I felt the air around me cool, my breath grow visible. Soon I was a shivering mess. Black snow started to fall. Within the hour, my fingertips were frostbitten. I knew if I stayed where I would freeze to death, if there even was such a thing anymore. I saw fire off in the distance while I was being hoisted by that metal amalgam. I crawled out from under the cart and began to trudge westward. In a blizzard of black snow, I lost all direction. It felt like moving through an endless void. I almost walked into the ruined stone wall when it suddenly loomed from the darkness. I collapsed against it and followed its edge until I found a door. I opened it and felt inside. There was a pit in the center of the room. From within it rose flames whose sparks licked at the ceiling. A man sat on a stone chair in the corner of the room. Crouched down, he was already 3 times my size. He wore a red robe that fell to his knees. Beneath it was more black, tattered cloth. His gangrenous feet were hobbled and bent fully backwards. From his mouth came a long, brass pipe. The white skin of his lips seemed to morph to its base. By his side was a bloated pig dressed as a nun. The door on the far side of the room opened, and a naked, malnourished man walked in. He sheepishly bowed to the red-robed figure. His panicked stutter made him speak in ellipsis. Before he could adequately make his point, the red-robed figure took him by his neck, lifted him in the air, and gored him on a pale knife he took from within his garbs. He tore it down from the man's clavicle to his pelvis, disemboweling as he went. The poor man screamed in impossible distress. The red-robed figure threw him into the pit of flames, letting his useless body turn to ash as his swine squealed in delight. Then he turned and looked at me. I burst from the room, slamming the door behind me. I ran, realizing that the blizzard had slowly subsided. In the unending darkness that came with the snowfall, I hadn't noticed that I'd wandered into something of a small town. The streets were engulfed in pandemonium. Market stalls sold human flesh, dishing out as a confectionery to the town's citizens. Those citizens were of an insectoid mammalian nycthic admixture and gnawed on cooked limbs as they passed me. I stumbled through the street, which was littered with dead fish, severed hands, and vomit. All around me was death and murder, with both the victims and perpetrators rejoicing in it. The most human of the crowd wore mishmashed scraps of old armor, which seemed to mesh with their feeble bodies. One burst out in front of me, his right arm replaced with a fiddle and his left with a bow. He played a tearing screech as he passed me, grinning in my face with his dozens of extra teeth. A dull conquistador helmet was bolted into his head, obstructing everything above the bridge of his nose. I pushed, panicked past endless crowds of the deformed. Finally, I found myself in the town square. On the far side, hidden behind a foreground, was a great tower. It rose higher than any other structure around it, almost touching the sky. At the very top, it was covered in rustic scaffolding, clearly still under construction. Winged workers carried bricks stolen from the town's buildings up to the new tower, adding to its height with a frenzied dedication. Surrounding me, on the street level, were countless tables lined with countless gamblers. They bet anything on everything, from poker to Russian roulette. What had once been an ornately carved marble fountain had been destroyed and turned into a makeshift dog fighting arena. While the deformed danced and cheered and clapped, men and women who appeared more like me were brutalized. They hung flayed like grotesque ornaments from long posts that dotted the town. 2 pig-headed things in long, Venetian robes stabbed repeatedly into nude beggars that lined the gutters. No amount of bludgeoning seemed to kill them, though. Their torture was truly endless. I wondered if mine would be. Despite my best attempts at rationalization, I knew what this was. I knew where I was. I was in hell. A hand rested on my shoulder. Too afraid to turn, my eyes did their best at determining the thing behind me from where I stood. Straining them in their sockets, I saw that long, jagged splinters of thick wood protruded from under his fingernails. I couldn't imagine the pain. I hoped neither could he. I turned and saw the man in full. He was old, weathered. His wrinkling skin was like leather. His hair and beard were long and gray and matted with dried blood. By his side was a small child, maybe 6 or 7. Neat blonde hair and bright blue eyes. His shirt was off, and I could see the baby goat that grew out of his abdomen at odd angles like a parasitic twin. I dropped to my knees. I clutched at the hems of the old man's long coat and begged. I begged for a second chance, to be let into heaven. What had I done to deserve this? I always try to be a good person, after all. I wept into his jacket, expecting sympathy. Seeing his suffering, I thought he was another one like me. Another person cast into this furnace, only to find brief companionship in his fellow condemned. I was wrong. The old man grabbed my hair, the splinters in his fingernails gouging his exposed nerves as he did. At the pain, he smiled. He yanked my head back, forcing me to look him in his eyes. They looked like rotting duck eggs. When he spoke, I noticed that his teeth were absent. In their place were rows and rows of fly larvae. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but instead cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, he preached in an animalistic tone, "What chance do you think you have?" Beside him, the child bleated. With that, he took a large hand scythe from his overcoat and stabbed it into my side. I lurched back, freeing myself from his grasp and, in the process, tearing a gash in my scalp. As I scrambled along the moist street floor, the goatish child leapt on me. He sank his sturdy teeth onto my leg, biting deep straight to the marrow of my shin bone. If my throat wasn't on fire, I would have screamed. I put a hand up in a pitiful attempt to stop the old man's approach. He swung the hand scythe again. This time, in a crescent arc, it cut through my palm. Now secured, he began to drag me by my wound through the street as the child began devouring the meat of my calf muscle. All around me, similar scenes erupted. A giant human head had broken up from the street tiles. Winged demons threw fellow sufferers into its gaping maw to face a second death by mastication. The condemned who surrounded were beaten and broken, crippled and rendered to piles of meat. I couldn't fathom another second, let alone an eternity. The old man finally reached his destination further down the street. The buildings here looked like large concrete recreations of alchemic beakers and tubing. There was a strange beauty in their dilapidated state. Outside one of the structures was a tall, narrow pole, made of wood. A rope hangs from a brass pulley at its summit. It ended in a thick hook. The old man dragged me to its base and slid the hand scythe from me. He took the dangling hook and tore it through the base of my chin. It ripped up through my lower jaw, its sharp tip peeping from my mouth. I spat out teeth and parts of my tongue. I gave up in that moment and waited for a death that would never come. The old man took the second part of the rope and started to hoist me. Slowly, my feet left the ground. Not too long after, the goatish child fell from my now purely skeletal leg. I was hoisted like a flag of surrender. Children covered in tumors emerged from their houses and started throwing rocks at me. I could feel every nerve ending, every pang of pain. The antonym of bliss overcame my senses. Every time I thought I reached the precipice of human suffering, something nudged me a little further. Then I felt the heat. I'm sure it was there for a long time before I noticed it, considering my senses were largely destroyed. There was always the background pain of burning since I arrived, but this was something more. I heard a noise like thunder, and from my bird's eye view, saw a blinding light encircle the town. It came in almost faster than I could perceive. It was a great firestorm, like the product of a hydrogen bomb. It moved like a devastating tsunami. Everyone and thing in its path was turned to dust in less than an instant. I could have wept at the thought of its salvation. The roaring plasma reached me within the second, and I felt it burn away my surface layer of flesh. Hell still refused me a quick end. Eventually, I found solace as my ashes mixed with that of the ruined landscape. I jolted suddenly on the white-tiled floors. The smell of cleaning products was almost unbearable. It took me some time to figure out the use of my body again. The pain was gone, but the memory of it still paralyzed me. Eventually, I rediscovered enough self-control to lurch onto my hands and knees. I looked around me and confirmed that I was back in the sterile room. Was this some sort of second chance? I looked again and saw the clipboard laying near the door. I crawled at an agonizing pace towards it. Every movement took expert planning and execution. Every fiber in my body felt like it was being piloted independently. An unknowable amount of time later, I reached the clipboard. It was as I guessed, the survey. However, all the pages I'd filled in had been flipped back. There was another one looking up at me, a new one. Asterisk, how would you rate your experience? Please circle one of the following asterisks beneath the printed words were a set of smiley faces, ranging from overjoyed to happy to neutral to sad and finally ending blind rage. I lay in front of the clipboard for some time. Exhausted, I realized I didn't have a pen this time. I took a shaky breath in and bit the tip of my right index finger. Hard. The skin broke and blood came gushing out. I reached forward and circled the last printed face, the most unsatisfied of the bunch, in my own blood. Once it was complete, I collapsed back down. My eyes felt heavy and my brain urged me to close them, to go to sleep. Still, when I heard the clacking of heels on a hardwood floor, I knew it had to fight to stay awake. I was looking up at the door when it opened. "Oh, you poor thing," said Lilith as she dropped to her knees. Something not quite malice, but far from warmth coated her words. She locked her arms around my shoulders and helped me to my feet. Once I was steady, she crouched down again and took the clipboard in my hands. She inspected it while I bent double and heaved, then shot me a smile. "Looks like we're all done here," she told me and began to lead me back down the way I came in. "Thank you so much for your time. Your feedback will really help us improve our service." Through the ornate halls and into the lobby. She practically pushed me out the front door. Once again, I was outside. It was dark now. The building I came out of returned to its unimposing gray self. I sheepishly looked up at Lilith. "What service?" I asked, stuttering my way through the words. She smiled and closed the drab front door, cutting off the warm light that came from within. I stood dumbfounded for a minute or two before I tried the handle. It was stiff and felt like moving granite. I started to slam my body weight into the door, shoulder first. Eventually, it swung open. Behind was a dank and unused storage room. The concrete floors were moistened by a still-dripping pipe somewhere overhead. Vermin scuttled in the darkness. I frowned and closed the door again. It was unexplainable, but far from the weirdest thing I'd seen that day. Not even in the top 20, I'd wager. I walked down the alley until I came to the main street. Few people were out this late, but a lone taxi was parked in its bay. I got in and asked the driver for a lift to my apartment. We arrived 15 minutes later. "That'll be €16.30. The driver barked. I reached into my pockets and quickly realized that I'd left my wallet at home that morning. I groaned and fished around for loose change. I felt something crumpled in my back pocket. I prayed it was a €20 note and took it out. It was an envelope. On the front was written payment, Lilith. I tore it open and counted out the change inside. €16.30 on the dot. I handed the envelope to the driver and got out. I took a few steps, fell to my knees, and started to cry. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.